Welcome again to another exciting episode of Digital Data Podcast DD. I'm Cecilia Maundu. I'm a broadcast journalist. I'm a digital security trainer. I work at the intersection of technology, journalism, and human rights. And we are continuing with our series, the Sustain Podcast series, where we are diving into open source tools and learning about all of what is happening in the open source world. And today I have Alex from Open Archive. Alex, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Cecilia.
So, introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, so I am currently the deputy director at Open Archive, and I am based in Western New York. Our entire organization is remote, so we're distributed throughout the United States, but also have people in India, Europe, South America. And as an organization, we work to protect freedom of expression by equipping human rights defenders with tools to securely share, archive, and verify and encrypt critical evidence that they're collecting on their mobile phones. So our main purpose is to strengthen mobile media archiving. And I've been in this kind of digital rights, human rights space for over a decade now.
Wow. Alex, the first time I met you, I don't know why I thought you looked like 23, 21. Now, when you say you've been here for the last 10 years, I'm like, oh, no, she didn't start this work when she was
I'll take that.
13. Yeah.
I will take that. I will take that.
It's good to have you on Digital Data Podcast, and it's exciting the work that you do, especially speaking for my fellow journalists who are human rights defenders in their own way, protecting freedom of expression both online and offline. So, Alex, tell me a little bit about your hopes and let me not use the word dreams because it sounds so cliche, but just tell me your hope about this Sustain project that you are part of now and what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, so I think, especially being at a smaller organization, we're always thinking about sustainability, and it's always top of mind, even though we have all these programs. And with our mobile app, Save, which is an archiving workflow tool, it's just a lot to balance as far as thinking about how do we move our programs forward? How do we move and keep the app up to date, running, make improvements? But then also, how do we remain sustainable and think about growing or even just maintaining at some points as an organization itself? So I think with the Sustain grant, what was really exciting to us is having funds actually set aside to think about that sustainability and be able to have time carved out of our kind of core team time to be like, okay, what is our strategy? What is our plans surrounding things like fundraising and keeping the organization and app going? And then also, especially, I think having Internews help with some pain points that we've been having, especially when it comes to hiring small teams at kind of full capacity, doing programs, doing recruitment, and trying to attract talent to a smaller organization can be really time consuming and hard. So having this embedded consultants and being able to have Internews help alleviate some of that pressure has been really, really wonderful. And we're excited to move forward with some of those consultants.
First, I would like to say to our viewers that this podcast has been made possible by Internews through the Sustain project. As you had Alex talk about Sustain. Sustain is funded by DRL, which is the State Department. And Sustain stands for Sustaining Safety Tools with Analytics and Insights and Networking. And it's all about finding mechanisms or sustainability action plans for open source tools like Open Archive, which Alex is part part of, on how they can be able to sustain themselves, because we know most open source tools are literally run by volunteers because there are literally very few funds. So sustain is about giving them a plan on how they can be able, in terms of fundraising, in terms of volunteership. Also, like Open Archive, I know one of the things they've wanted to do is expand their user base. So yes, so that's all about sustain. So Alex, my next question is, how did you come up with the idea of Open Archive, and like what motivated that? Because it's such an amazing idea, especially knowing that human rights defenders are always in trouble when it comes to the issue of documentation. So what was the idea behind, what motivated you to come up with Open Archive?
Yes, so I cannot take credit at all for the founding of Open Archive. That goes to our executive director, Natalie Catronell. And Open Archive actually has been a kind of project since 2014, 2015. It came about as part of her master's program when she was at Berkeley. So a project that developed from that. She had been in activist spaces, citizen journalist spaces, and was frustrated with how kind of policy was not catching up to technological developments or what was happening on the ground. And really, from her own lived experiences and experiences with others that she was friends, colleagues with, close to, found that there is this need to be able to securely and sometimes pseudonymously share what you're capturing with your mobile phones, and especially thinking back to 2014, 2015, capturing things on mobile phones. So like actions, protests, human rights violations in the States, police brutality is an special issue here. Making sure that that media isn't ephemeral, isn't just disappearing into social media spaces, which, as we've seen with Twitter, which I refuse to call X, having posts being taken down, or having governments decide to ask social media to take down posts, being able to get people to think about that longevity of this media that they have, because it can form a people's history. It's much easier to use some corporate tools, some, like, let's say, easier to use WhatsApp or iMessage to send photos to people, much easier sometimes to post things to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, than it is to think more, I guess, securely and about the longevity of those media items. So finding a tool that's just as easy to use as those other solutions, that's really user friendly, but also has these security aspects, authenticity aspects, verification aspects baked into them. That was a really big drive for Natalie when she created Open Archive.
Wow. One thing that I have taken from that is the way policy is yet to catch up with technology. Well, things have been changing, but still, we are still at that place whereby like policy is yet to catch up with technology. Yes, we know that technology is very dynamic. It's going at a very fast rate. It's like fashion. You can't keep up with fashion because today there's this, tomorrow there is that. But I think it's very important for technology and policy to be at par. And it's such, when you say that, it's very thought provoking, and you're like, interesting. Are we at a place whereby there is hope that policy can able to catch up with technology? Let's see. Let's hope in a few years we'll be having a different conversation. So, Alex.
Yep. And
yes, please.
No, just to say too that I think with tool building specifically, it's an opportunity to feel like you're having that more direct impact and being able to put something in the hands of the people who are doing this really great activism work. So instead of having to wait, like you said, for the policy to develop, waiting for that kind of up-down approach that policy tends to kind of have, because not everyone can implement policy and
Yeah.
decide on policy. Being able to have those tools that you're able to see go into an activist in Iran's hands and allow them to do their work safely, I think that's really rewarding. And I think when it comes to the open source tool space, especially those focused on human rights, it's one of the best things about it.
Thank you for that. So, Alex, I'm just curious to find out how do you define sustainability in the context of
Yeah.
open source software development, specifically for Open Archive?
Yeah, so I think and our team tends to think about sustainability in almost like three different buckets. One is this sustainability of funding. So how can you find funding? And as you mentioned, a pretty low resourced space, or a space where it's either really competitive to get funding, really difficult to identify different sources and streams of income, especially since a lot of these open source tools are free, so that there's a low barrier of entry to use. Another bucket is, how do we think about the sustainability of the app itself? How do we consistently maintain it? How do we think about that balance between making sure it's working and bug free, addressing other kind of user requests and issues, and really innovating on the app? So how do we kind of not future proof it, but make sure it's still relevant and useful for those who are needing it? And then a third final bucket, which I personally think is very important, is sustainability of our people. And maybe sustainability isn't necessarily the most perfect word for it, but how do you make sure the people who are part of our team, A, aren't burning out, aren't feeling kind of worn down, overburdened? Especially again in a smaller organization, you wear so many hats and you have to do so many different tasks. It's always the balance between how do we push the actual programs and app forward versus how do we think about things more like sustainability, and funding's always on the mind, hiring the right talent and maintaining the right talent is on the mind. So how do we make sure that we're kind of a healthy team and a healthy organization from that kind of people perspective?
Oh, I like that three baskets. Well, fundraising is very key because,
Mhm.
as we say, there's very little funding for open source, and I think we've seen in the recent past that donors are actually now taking note of open source tool, and also
Mhm.
I think one thing I like is. When it comes to the people who work in this open source tool, the way you're talking about the health of your people, like, are you paying them well? Are they
Mhm.
content? Because I believe the efforts they put is what makes the tool very good. And if you have a good tool, then you'll always have end users who are satisfied and who are able to use the tool.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so can you share some examples of sustainability challenges or issues that Open Archive has faced in the past, and how did you manage to overcome them? Because we know there are people who will be listening who have tools and they would want to learn from you.
Yeah. I think, again, a big one, as has been already mentioned multiple times, is that um, funding gaps, I think, are a real big concern to us and a challenge that Open Archive had faced. So again, going back to kind of the history of the organization, um, in, let's say, prior to 2020, Natalie had some kind of smaller funding grants come through to help build a prototype, then help improve on the app itself. I know the Open Tech Fund, or OTF, that's based in the US, is a really kind of big funder of especially those tools that are just starting out and needing to be developed when it comes to free and open source software. So a grant from that helps bring it from this kind of prototype idea to an actual app. I know Knight Foundation also really helped with that initial funding. But then when that initial funding ran out, there was, I think, a year and a half period where it was just very small grants or fellowships that Natalie was able to get to kind of just on a shoestring, the shoestring of shoestringiest budgets, keep the app going. And I know that prior to Internews's sustain funding, there was an Internews program called Basics, and that
Yes.
kind of helped bring in some people, especially for communications and helping us promote the app, thinking about our kind of brand identity. But gaps in that funding means that you lose people because um, as great as the I think idea in the open source community is that you can rely on volunteers, you also don't want to be exploitive,
Yeah.
and people need to live, and especially in I feel like the environment that most of us live in now, and the ultra capitalism um, space that the world is at now, it becomes very hard to um, get those volunteers and rely and think about using people's labor for free to maintain these apps and keep things going when you can't compensate them fairly for what they're working on. And it's fabulous to have those people who are really committed to the cause, who do want to join this open source space. They are heroes in my mind, and absolutely fabulous. But those funding gaps do cause challenges, and we saw some of the Save app, especially in our Android version, kind of the code getting very, very buggy, things weren't
Yeah.
maintained. So then when we did get funding, it's kind of having to start back at step one. Instead of being able to innovate and move forward, you are kind of stuck going back to square one and needing to review all the code, making sure things are updated, things haven't been deprecated. So that is a really, really big challenge. It's like 2 steps forward when you get funding, sometime 1 step back. So we're really thinking about how to keep our funding kind of rolling now that we're in a good place. How do we ensure that we don't have those gaps? Or what is our specific plan when those gaps come? And then again, going back to the people part, really thinking about what people power we need so that our team isn't burning out, and that we are able to move forward with the great work that we want to do and push forward.
Well, funny you bring out that issue of burnout, because we know that a lot of open source tools are run by volunteers, but as you say, people need to leave, people have bills, and you find the volunteers going through a burnout. And then unfortunately, we know
Mm.
most of the open source tools, if not all of them, are literally defending human rights. They're critically needed, especially in the society of today, seeing what is happening around the globe. So I think my next question would be, what can motivate funders to be able to pump in more money into this open
Mhm.
source tool? What is it that we can do as who are in this space? Sometimes you also have to ask yourself, what solution can you bring? So what can we do, or how can we make funders give more money to this?
Yeah, I think right now there's like a core set of funders who I think a lot of tool teams, organizations focusing on this go to. And I think one of the issues is figuring out how to expand that pool, and how do you bring new especially foundations or even big private donors, how do you get that corporate money even, which I know can be controversial, taking money from
Agreed.
corporations, but our view is, you know what, we're taking it from them almost like a Robin Hood. We're taking them from them and using it for good. All money can be dirty money in some way, so at least we're using it to kind of pay our team, improve these apps, and advance human rights instead of something else they might use for it. That's a little tangent of mine. But going back to the point, I think figuring out how you can make these tools relevant in a more broader way. So, how can you show funders that yes, they're funding this maybe like tool team that has a specific mission, but it impacts all these different kind of social justice, um, even like environmental justice touch points. So showing how even though a tool might sound niche, it actually is really relevant to all these different spaces. So to bring in funders that might be more kind of keen on funding environmental justice organizations, showing them how, hey, this tool can be foundational and useful. In our case, for those who are documenting environmental disasters, documenting, I know we work with some organizations in South America who they're documenting land rights of indigenous people and using their mobile phones to capture that and needing a safe place for archiving. So figuring out how to, I think often these open source tools and projects live in this like internet freedom space, digital rights space, but how can we show that it's relevant beyond that and kind of make that pool of funders bigger for this cause? And then second, I think a key issue again is thinking about just I don't want to use the word sustainability again, but just how do you keep operations just flowing when you're maintaining versus innovating? So a lot of these kind of funders want to fund, and rightly so, kind of projects that introduce new features that have something new to them. And that can be great, but sometimes especially again thinking about smaller teams, what you really need is space to maintain an app, to make sure that everything is working, the like critical user path flows are just flowing as they should, and that you're able to do user research and quality assurance, which aren't as kind of sexy to fund because it is just kind of doing a lot of basic research, gathering information, but that then leads to what you need to innovate for. So having funders being more willing to fund maintaining and just basic operations to keep an organization going, um, that I think is also a huge gap and something that needs to be addressed in addition to not just one-off year grants, but funding for multiple years. So you do have a little bit more of a runway to do what you need to do and not have to be worried about next month we're losing our funding. So instead of focusing on kind of the core of what we do, I'm going to focus on just fundraising, fundraising, fundraising.
And to show how fundraising is very critical, you talked about like maintaining the tool, because you find if you don't maintain the tool in the next funding, you will be concentrating on things like bags. So it's
Exactly.
like moving the way you said it, 2 steps
Yeah.
forward, 10 steps backward.
Yeah.
So, what role does community? Because we know community is very key when it comes to open source tools, right? So, what role does community engagement and contributions play in ensuring the sustainability of or open archive?
Yeah. So I think that when you're thinking about open source tools, the first thing, or at least the first thing that I kind of think of or comes to mind, is community engagement that is contributing to the code directly, or having, like you said, a big kind of set of volunteer maintainers who are looking at the app code. But that in itself can be very, very challenging for smaller organizations because it takes time to build community. It takes time to review that code that those volunteers are adding. And we've had some, I think, people in the past contribute to code as volunteers and are kind of main developers being like, this actually breaks 5 different things. So for some tools, there can be kind of a learning curve that is pretty steep to make sure that those code contributions are not breaking other things, causing other bugs. But they can be like so crucial when you're in that phase of maintaining or you're in those funding slips to keep things alive. So one other way I think about community involvement for tools, especially for Save and Open Archive, is thinking about testing the tool, giving feedback on the tool, letting us know if there are any bugs, letting us know what is your case study, what is your story of your organization or you as a user, what are the questions you have about, like, how is this tool actually useful for me, or I tried using this tool in this way and it didn't work. I think that one of the things that, especially at Open Archive, we just really truly care about is this user feedback research, creating that user feedback loop. We don't want to develop anything in a kind of black box or just think one day, oh, this would be a cool feature to add, or hey, we saw this tool on this feature, so let's integrate it into Save. We want to make sure that what we're doing is actually community driven. So being able to have smaller organizations, individuals, people like citizen journalists, activists, be able to kind of get involved, feel like they can get involved and try out the tool. Let us know if it doesn't work for them or what was missing that kind of caused them not to find it to be a fit, so that we can really think about how to kind of innovate, help create resources beyond just our Save app. At Open Archive, we do a lot of trainings and guide productions and best practices. So thinking beyond just the tool and how we can create almost like a suite of resources for this community is something we really care about. And I think community involvement, especially in that way, on the less tech side, can be just as crucial as those technical volunteers.
I like that. And also, I think I like the idea of having resources that the community can use. And also, another key is user feedback, because we keep
Yeah.
saying that you could be having an excellent tool, but if you don't have people using, it beats logic. Or you have an excellent tool which the users, the end users, are really, really struggling to use. You find people don't have patience nowadays. They move on to the next thing. So that's very key. So, and also, how does Open Archive prioritize feature development? You talked about development and then bug fixes, which you had earlier mentioned, and also maintenance tasks to ensure the ongoing usefulness of its tool. Because the more you maintain the tool, the better the tool becomes as we move forward.
Exactly. So I think we rank it as like number one priority, number two priority, number three priority. I really like grouping things into buckets. It's how I think, and
I
I
should
find it
steal that idea from you.
really useful. But I think number one, like I mentioned, is making sure those key user pathways are working smoothly without frustrations, without any bugs. So again, this is more maintenance, but making sure that the app is just working as you intended. Especially when you have a wide global user base like we do, and with a mobile app especially, something might be working smoothing on the newest version of the iPhone, but there's some weird bugs that pop out with an older version of the iPhone. So making sure that across all kind of possible user groups, that is a kind of smooth experience, that's number one. So that kind of bug squashing. When we talk about key user pathways or key user workflows, what we're really talking about is kind of the most basic functions of the app are working as they should, and a user can use it without, like you said, kind of struggling, feeling frustrated, and giving up on the app. I think number two, our second priority, is making sure those frustrations are addressed, because it's one thing to just identify them. And this is where that kind of constant research comes in. We want to make sure from a UX, UI, usability, user interaction perspective, that the app is not frustrating, so that we're keeping those users. They're still not only seeing value in the app, but as much as you can enjoy using an app, enjoy using the app. And then number three is finding that kind of new funding, usually to add kind of bigger new features based on the research that we do. So for example, coming up, we are working on making the app more secure, having some kind of features that can be enabled for those who are in more high risk situations. So these are kind of new features that are going to be added to the app, all based on research that we've done, needs assessments that we've done, that are going to be significant changes to the app itself. We're only doing those now because, again, we've had the funding to get kind of those bugs cleared. We did a whole redesign of the app over the past 6 months, so it's much more user friendly, easier to use. So we're ready to kind of move kind of beyond those key user frustrations and start thinking of, okay, what new can we add? We're also looking at kind of the decentralized web and decentralized storage as a possible kind of not yet completely space that's ready to use by especially at-risk human rights activists, but a kind of interesting storage, not mechanism, but storage technology that could be useful as it develops in the future. So kind of really thinking beyond just what is currently in the app and yeah, being innovative and exciting.
Wow, it seems like you people really have an amazing plan for Open Archive, and I mean, I
Yeah.
can't wait to see what the future has in store for you guys and for the people who are the end users, who are the most important component of this conversation. So you might have touched a little bit on this, but can you provide insights into the roadmap and future plans for Open Archive in terms of sustainability and growth?
Yeah, so I think again, big one is always it always comes back to funding. Funding is at the core. Money makes the world go round, unfortunately. But I think again, I
Show
think I
me the
mentioned
money.
we're at. I know exactly. Show me the money
Yeah.
and show me the consistent money that lasts for 5 years instead of just a year and then having to move on to the next big project. So building on that, I think we're currently in a nice sweet spot for funding where we have a little bit of a runway with the grants that we've currently brought in. So we're actually very thankfully and luckily able to look to 2026 and really figuring out how do we build out that nice runway cushion of funding since we're in a really privileged spot right now. We want to take advantage of that funding privilege that we're in right now as much as possible. Um, I think one of our big goals is to find a kind of, like I mentioned, consistent funder, a funder who can commit for like 3 years or ideally 5 years with some sort of baseline funding that keeps the lights on, that maybe doesn't allow, if that was the only funding that we had, doesn't allow our full team to work full time or us to have kind of as broad of a reach as we do now. But if we just had that funding, we'd be able to keep the lights on. We'd be able to maintain the app. We'd be able to kind of keep Open Archive alive so that we can then supplement that funding with kind of more project funding, grant funding, the typical funding that you have to kind of compete for. And like I mentioned before, tends to be new stuff that you have to kind of add to the app or think about. So that's really our kind of big roadmap, as well as, again, focusing on the people, making sure that our team isn't burning out, isn't feeling overwhelmed, that we're kind of making sure that we're recognizing everyone as people who are living still in a COVID-filled world with conflicts in kind of every corner. And it can be really hard, especially if you're working in human rights, to kind of feel safe, feel secure, feel motivated sometimes. So really making sure that we're taking care of our community, our people, so that we can all feel as supported and take away any stress that we can, as much as an organization can take that kind of stress and anxiety away.
And I mean, funding is one way of getting that anxiety and stress away. And I like what
Mm-hmm.
you said, show me the money, and not just money, consistent money. Because, Alex, if, yes, any funding is good, but you see you get a funding for 6 months. Before you blink an eye, it's 6 months already. You blink an eye,
Exactly.
it's 1 year already. So 5 years actually makes you even have bigger roadmap plans. You know that
Mm-hmm.
because 3 years from now, this funding is there, we can be able to achieve A, B, C, D. So I also hope that funders will be listening to that. Yes, money is good. Any money is good. But
Please listen to that. Yes.
Yes, but consistent and long-term funding. So, how can the broader open source community and users contribute to ensuring the sustainability of Open Archive?
Yes, I think try our tool, use our tool, let us know what you find frustrating about our tool. What is the tool kind of not addressing within your needs? Are there any kind of ideas that you might have for something that we can integrate that might be really useful to you, or that you feel like is missing in other tools that you might be using? Again, I think that community feedback, not just getting, I think one thing that we're very conscious of is we don't want to push our tool on people who it isn't useful for, but also just really isn't the right fit from like a safety, security, risk assessment. So I think also working with the kind of broader community and user base to understand what is your risk assessment model? How can we help you think about your risk assessment and needs, especially when it comes to this mobile archiving? Is Save the right tool for you? Is there something else that's out there that might be a better fit? Is there nothing? And that's a kind of gap where either Save needs to think about trying to fill, or we need to kind of pose it to the broader open source tool space that, hey, there's this need. Someone be creative because it's beyond our mission to do. So I think getting that feedback, that use, figuring out what the actual user needs are and what our community wants, what they're struggling with, that's just so valuable to us and what really drives the work that we do. It's we're just a tool to help people do that great work. We are just always in awe of our partners and the kind of tenacity that they have and the work that they do. So whatever they can contribute and kind of give to us to help them is, yeah, all that we want.
And Alex, I read somewhere that getting feedback is like pulling teeth. Like it's such a hard job. So, and it's the same thing with podcasting. You always want to know what your listeners think about your
Mhm.
content. Like what can I improve on? So let's hope like end users will always see the importance of feedback, because it's only good feedback that can help you improve on the tool, and also the end users can tell you what they need, what they don't need, and you create a tool that is very functional for them. Yeah, so I understand.
Yes.
So anything else you want to add as we come to the tail end of this conversation?
Ooh, I feel like we discussed a lot and a lot of things that I'm very passionate about.
And
So
I like
always happy to talk through.
you're such a good interviewer. Like like
Thank you.
interviewee. Like I'm just listening to you talk, and I'm learning so much as I'm listening to you talk. So yeah, yeah. So
No, this has been,
is there something that you wanna say that you feel like you've not said?
yeah, I think I might have mentioned this already. Who knows what I've said? Again, it's the morning for me. But I think having kind of bigger, more established organizations like Internews have projects like Sustain, have projects like their former Basics program, it's just really valuable to us. Again, as a smaller org, you have less visibility in this space. Sometimes people, if you put out a job posting or trying to recruiting, it's very burdensome on your internal team itself, because it's just I don't want to say just another task, because it's super crucial, in finding those cultural matches is so important. But it just adds to that burden on the team that you already have. So being able to have Internews help with some of that recruiting, again, be able to give us funding to do this work, is just really fantastic, and connecting us with the partners that you have also involved in the project, to have that outside perspective, especially when thinking about strategy, and pull us out from that kind of day to day, make us, not make us, but enable us to have that kind of time to set aside to be like, okay, yeah, we're going to really think about our needs at a much deeper level and what our actual goals are, what are the milestones that we're hoping to reach. That's just really valuable for a team in our place. And yeah, needs to just be more funding to fund this type of work, in addition to all the other great work that's going on in the human rights, digital rights world.
Again, show me the money. Show me the money.
Yep.
And as Alex, in your words, consistent money. So
Yes.
thank you so much, Alex, for making the time in such an early morning from your end to be able to sit down with me. As I said, you're such an amazing interviewee.
Thank
I've
you.
enjoyed the conversation, and also I've learned a lot from you. So thank you so much. I wish you all the best with Open Archive. And as we said, a few years from now, we'll be having a very different conversation because of the efforts that you're putting in your tool. So again, thank you.
Let's hope. Thank you so much, Cecilia.
We-
Always a pleasure speaking.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, people, for watching the show. Thank you so much for always tuning in to Digital Data Podcast. This podcast episode, as I said, is called the Sustain podcast series. It has been made possible by Internews, the Sustain project, which is funded by DRL. Sustain stands for Sustaining Safety Tools with Analytic Insights and Networking. It's all about creating sustainability for open source tool. So see you in the next episode.